As a signatory of the Rome Statute that established the International Criminal Court, South Africa is duty-bound to arrest Russian President Vladimir Putin. You will remember the ICC issued a warrant of arrest for alleged war crimes in Ukraine. If Putin attends the BRICS bloc summit in August, it would be his first appearance outside Russia or occupied Ukraine since the Hague-based ICC issued a warrant for his arrest in March. Meanwhile, earlier this week, President Cyril Ramaphosa said South Africa would pull out of the ICC before the presidency made a U-turn, citing a communication error from the ANC. Now, to unpack this further, let's bring in political analyst Professor Sipho Seepe. Good evening to you, Professor. Thank you very much for joining us here on Newsnight. First and foremost, let's just touch on this U-turn that was made by the president. When he was in the presence of the Finnish president, he mentioned one thing with regards to South Africa's position in the ICC, and then later his office said that it was a miscommunication. If we could just get your view and opinion on that.
Well, I think the first thing is that the president is the president of the ANC, and he attends the meetings of the ANC where decisions are taken. So he should have been alive to the reality of what the deliberations were and what the resolutions are. So he cannot blame the ANC for misspeaking or for being confused. So that's the first thing. But he's also a president who also understands that this matter is not new. We've had Al-Bashir, who created the same scenario that we find ourselves in. But the court had since made it clear that South Africa is obligated by both its own domestication of the Rome Statute. And so when the ICC says this person should be arrested, South Africa should have been guided, and the president should have been guided as a person who's also supposedly has studied law to say in terms of the findings of a High Court and the Supreme Court of Appeal, this is the position of the ANC, and that would have been consistent with the resolution of the ANC. But when you have you are a president who wants to play to the gallery, when everything about you is all about public relations exercise, you are dictated by expediency, not by principle. So when Ramaphosa spoke and took that position, it was a position that many people were surprised that he would take, given the fact that we've had an experience on this matter. Ramaphosa should have been better and wiser, but he was not. So it exposed the whole notion of having leadership that is not principled. But as one could understand, when you're always on a fence and you're pushed into a corner, you don't know how to respond. So here we have a president of Russia, and we've taken a position on Russia that we're not going to condemn Russia. We've expressed reservations, but we have not joined the bandwagon of those who are condemning Russia. We've actually said, well, it is wrong, but we're not going to be taking sides. But you can't sustain that position of always being on the fence, especially when there are clear issues that have to do with human rights. South Africa could still have taken a position, but they then raise the other issues that says, be that as it may, we are not comfortable with the ICC for these particular reasons. But you cannot have it both ways. And because we're trying to get it both ways, we now find ourselves having to explain to everybody about our non-position on anything.
Professor, would you say that it is a difficult position that the president finds himself in? Because like you said, there are these two sides, one where human rights issues are at play, and then the other is South Africa's long-standing relationship with Russia. As the president, how would you like to see him maneuver the situation to make sure that, you know, there is some sort of a positive outcome at the end of the day? Because how then do we make sure that the relationship between South Africa and Russia is continued, or do you have do you see no need for that relationship to continue? Just what is your stance?
Well, there's a position that we claim and we state that we are a country that is governed by laws, and we have judgments. you also have a party that has a position. And the position is not that of a withdrawal. And the president should have been alive to that. It still surprised people that he has chosen to be so confused because the position taken by the ANC in December, and that's not so long ago, was very clear that South Africa will remain within the ICC. But if you remain within the ICC, you will also know that there are obligations. So if you're principled, you'll be guided by your principle. But if you want to please everybody else and everyone, then you'll find yourself pussyfooting and tap dancing. And in the end, you are bound to embarrass yourself, as the president has embarrassed himself. And after he uttered that statement was carried out internationally. So you cannot be a president who sits and you stand in front of another president, a visiting president, and you utter statements that you have not thought through. And for you to blame that on somebody else is typical of Ramaphosa, that he never takes ownership of his own mistakes. He should have actually said, I have blundered. But to say, no, I was misled by the statement that was made by the ANC that you lead, is itself problematic. So you need to have a person who's resolute, and even if you make some people unhappy. We've been here before where Naledi Pandor not so long ago did come out with a statement that the US or anybody else must not think that it will start dictating who South Africa's friends or enemies are. That's a principled position. Mandela was able to tell Bill Clinton, when Clinton and the US were concerned about South Africa's relationship with the people like Gaddafi and Cuba. And Mandela was very clear that anybody who thinks they can dictate to South Africa, and Clinton was a president of a powerful nation, but Mandela was very clear that principles dictate that your enemies are not my enemies, and the people who have been with me, I'm not going to abandon them just because you think it is convenient for me to do so. So this is what you call principled leadership, which we do not have. And if you do not have principles, you'll find yourself tap dancing and always making a fool of yourself, as we seem to be doing very well in this country.
Professor, as you mentioned earlier, you did mention that South Africa is duty-bound to arrest the Russian president if he lands in South Africa. But what are the consequences then if he comes to the BRICS summit and he is not arrested and is allowed to leave the country again? What sort of consequences are there for something like that if it was to happen?
Well, you can expect a bit of mayhem. I mean, you've already have people, and I mean, if you listen to the DA, they've indicated that should President Putin find himself in Western Cape, they are going to make sure that he is arrested. So you're going to have a situation where a provincial government begins to undermine a national government, and they've made that statement very strongly. You're going to have a lot of people, well, what you could say, one would expect that the civil society that was up and about during Jacob Zuma's rule, they will also be concerned. But like we have seen, that they have also been mere hypocrites. They are captured, if one were to use the language that has become common in South Africa. Those who paid them have invested in Ramaphosa. And that's why you don't see all these foundations raising concerns. Even individuals who are up out there have actually suddenly become deafeningly silent. But the point is, should Putin come here and not be arrested, then we are going to find ourselves unable to explain to ourselves, given first that we claim to be a law-abiding country, and the ANC has claimed that it is law-abiding, and its new leader has been presented as a leader who was going to restore what was broken. So the ANC, because it lacks a principled position, it finds itself in this invidious position where it has to come up with multiple positions. I mean, for instance, one of the senior members of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, went gave an interview not so long ago to say it was a mistake for South Africa not to have withdrawn from ICC. And then on the other hand, you have a president who has to correct himself on a statement. So the point is, we need to, the ANC must take this as a lesson. But one of the things that is being pursued right now is an attempt to persuade President Putin to attend the meeting virtually. But one must also understand that when you take this position and you force a member and a powerful member of BRICS and not to come, the other BRICS countries will have to ask whether you can be a partner to be relied upon. And we must also understand that South Africa is a very small player. Our economy is minuscule compared to India, compared to Brazil, compared to China, compared to Russia. So we cannot have it both ways. But it does help when you take a principled position, because what we are doing now is that we might actually lose all friends that we pretend to have. We might lose support from the BRICS. We'll also lose support from the US, from UK, from Germany, from France. So this notion of thinking that you can please all masters has never worked, and it will not work.
Just lastly, Professor, you mentioned the Democratic Alliance and their stance. What do you make of the EFF stating that, in their opinion, the Russian president is welcome in South Africa?
Well, I mean, the EFF and also the SACP, and you could also say left-leaning political parties in this country who are largely black, they would take a stance that the US and other countries in the West will not dictate who should be the friends of South Africa. And they've made it very clear that as far as they're concerned, the double standards are sufficient to make sure that Putin, when he comes, he's actually protected in the same way that the countries that have committed major atrocities in the world, their presidents come and go. But this shows the whole notion of the hypocrisy and duplicity that the people have actually raised with regard to the Western powers as well as ICC.
Professor, is this a crisis for President Cyril Ramaphosa and his administration?
Oh, it is a continued crisis. He's faced with the moral crisis, he's faced with the political crisis, he's faced with the economic crisis. So this is just a crisis of lack of a backbone. But these crises are all self-created. The fact that today you just announced the blackouts. It is the president who has been promising us since he was the deputy president that within 18 months we'll have resolved the issue of load shedding. But the things have become worse. He has been in what is called the war room. He has promised when he took over that things will get better. But since he took over, everything that matters has gone for the worse. So the crisis continues. But now what you have is that the crisis of leadership has really become much more urgent, and it has become much more clearer.
Professor, let's leave it there for now. We appreciate your time and your insights, as always. Professor Sipho Seepe joining us there via Zoom. He is a political analyst, just talking to us about South Africa's duty when it comes to the arrest of Russian President Vladimir Putin when he possibly sets foot in South Africa for the BRICS summit happening in August. Professor stating that he could possibly attend via Zoom.